Hello everyone, my name's Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. It takes all kinds of critters to make Farmer Vincent's Fritters, so runs the tagline for 1980's Motel Hell, an endearing oddball combo of black humor and horror, featuring veteran character actor Rory Calhoun as Vincent, the proprietor of the Motel Hello, where the O on the neon sign keeps going on the blink. Vincent and his equally wacky sister Ida, played by a pre-Porky's Nancy Parsons, make their living by ensnaring unsuspecting motorists to fill up the skins of their famous Farmer Smith sausages. For his first American feature, Kevin Connor takes a break from directing Amicus's fantasy epics such as The Land That Time Forgot, At the Earth's Core, and Warlords of Atlantis, to helm the madness provided by the sibling, producing screenwriting team of Robert and Steven-Charles Jaffee, and does a smashing job balancing the chainsaws and the chuckles. Calhoun and Parsons are terrific in their respective roles, and the spirited send-up and multitude of off-the-wall vignettes have earned Motel Hell a lasting cult reputation, distinguishing it from the glut of slashers emerging around the same time. Let's head on down to the farm and celebrate 45 years of Motel Hell. As Granny always said, meat's meat and man's gotta eat. We're going to be talking Motel Hell from 1980, celebrating its 45th anniversary, and we have an incredible panel to chat about with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Jen Olson.
Hello.
Eric Fritters.
Hola.
Jesselyn Abbott.
Hi.
S.A. Bradley.
Hi, thanks very much for having me on.
And John Pata.
Hello.
And we'll be chatting Motel Hell from 1980, celebrating its 45th anniversary. And we will be talking spoilers for this 45-year-old movie. So just prepare yourselves, everyone. But that also means we can dive deep, and let's get to it. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody. And welcome. This is one of those movies that I always saw on the video shelves. I walked past it. I can't even tell you how many times before I actually picked it up. It was not what I was expecting by the time I got around to it, because while this movie did come out in 1980, the slasher boom hadn't even really begun. I think it was already in production before Friday the 13th came out. So this idea was already cooking in their heads, but I think it did come out around that same time. And I think it kind of got lumped in with a lot of the slashers, but it is something completely different. John, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Welcome back to the doc's office. It's been, I want to say almost a couple of years now. So
yeah, I'm long overdue for a checkup.
I'm so glad to have you back. How did you come to Farmer Vincent's $2.95 sampler platter for the first time?
Yeah, what a deal! First,
I know. I totally thought
much like you, walking the video store, I grew up with a neighborhood video store called Captain's Video that had not just a horror section, but it was a room. It was called the House of Horror. And it was 4 walls just lined with horror videos. And I was known as John R.O.K. because I was allowed to rent R-rated movies when I was 9 and 10 years old. And my best friend and I truly would just like rent down the wall. We'd take one shelf and go down its way. And Motel Hell was one of those. I probably saw it when I was 11 or 12. And I'm not sure I really appreciated it as much then, because when you're 11 and 12 and you're really getting into horror, Motel Hell doesn't necessarily have what you want at that time. And but over the years, I really gained an appreciation for it. And aside from watching it the other night, I think the last 3 times I saw it was in a theater or with a crowd. And that is truly the best way to see this movie. It's not after being spoiled with that, sitting at home by myself on a Friday night was not the same view.
You're like, where is everybody?
It was still very enjoyable, of course.
Cool. Let's bounce over to you, Scott.
My first inkling of Motel Hell was actually the Fangoria issue number 9, seeing it on the stands. And, you know, at that time, Fangoria is just kind of coming into itself. The first issue has Godzilla. The second issue has like R2-D2 and stuff like that on there. But there's little hints that it's going to be gory, you know, little pictures on the side thing of like poked out eyes. And then all of a sudden there's Motel Hell, this magazine cover. And it's a huge bloody chainsaw with a guy wearing a bloody pig's head. And I just went, oh, now they've done it. It was good while it lasted, but they're not going to allow this magazine to keep going. And it's so funny at that time in 1980. Seeing that was so weirdly subversive and seemed like, I don't know if I could watch this movie. Really? I don't know. This is kind of like out there. What are they going to be doing in this? So I didn't go to it immediately. I thought it was a completely different type of movie. I didn't realize that it was going to be serious horror comedy, one of the few horror comedies that gives love to the horror genre as opposed to just kind of mocking it or doing a parody. And I came to it on video like everybody else. I don't think anybody saw it in the theater. Very few people saw it in the theater when it first came out. And when I saw it, I was like going from the very beginning, the picture of the Motel Hello neon. I was like going, okay, this is feeling like it's Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected. What's this going to be like? I come back to it often because it kind of threw me a curve. Every time I do, though, I find things that I really like and other things I'm like going, oh, man, it's obviously written by 20-year-olds, right?
Jen Olson, let's bounce up to you. This is one that you were like, I am primed to talk about this movie. What about Motel Hell is it that you love so much?
So this movie is special to me because it's the first gory horror movie I was allowed to see. I was maybe 6 or 7 when I saw this movie for the first time. We always had a family pizza night, and we would run a movie when we were waiting for the pizza. And my dad said, hey, Motel Hell, I saw this when it first came out. Let's watch it. And it just drew me in, and I've been a lover of gory horror movies ever since.
Awesome. Eric, let's go and bounce over to you.
I heard about it for at least 10 years before I ever actually laid eyes on a video cassette. A friend of a friend named Robert Crispino, who was a very country soul who lived in Macon, Mississippi, used to go on and on to my friend Joe about all the horror movies he loved. He loved Crazy Fat Ethel, which is criminally insane.
Yeah. Which I just watched recently.
Crazy Fat Ethel. Oh, that's just it's marvelous. But he also talked about Motel Hell and Farmer Vincent, and that's where I learned it takes all kinds of critters to make Farmer Vincent critters. I heard about this thing, and it was years later, and it was on cable one night. I was like, okay, I'm finally going to watch this thing. I probably made it about a third in and found something else to do, but have recently revisited and have to say that it was quite the ride. And for much of it, I was just sort of lightly amused and intrigued by the character of this film. It's got some good stuff going on and a neat personality to it, but I wasn't sure why everyone made such a big deal about it until you get to the end. We'll leave that for later.
And Jesselyn.
I actually saw it for the first time in November of last year. Alamo Drafthouse did a Terror Tuesday. I'm interested. I'm glad to hear that, Scott, you had mentioned when you were seeing it on Fangoria, they had the pig head imagery. And I was curious if that was something that they hid until later as a reveal at the end, or if that was something they had marketed during the outreach of it when it came out. So that was on the website for Alamo, was the picture of the pig head with us all. And I was very drawn to that, obviously, okay, how do we get there? But I was surprised that they dropped such a huge spoiler of an ending as an image that early. So I'm curious about that. But yeah, I watched it at a midnight watching with a bunch of silly people, which is, like you said, John, one of the best ways to see something like this.
When Shout Factory put it out on Blu-ray about 10 years ago, they also had a graphic with, the pig head and the chainsaw. On the one hand, I'm like, I get it. You're selling the steak, but also it's that's such a wonderful reveal because you just do not expect that coming. So when I was growing up, I mean, the poster art is very different than that. And it is a surprise. So, you're going into it going, okay, there's something weird going on with Farmer Vincent and his sister. You don't know that there's a big chainsaw duel coming where one of the participants is wearing a pig head. And I feel like that's one of those things that maybe should be preserved. It being on the cover of Fango #9, it is that thing of, I need to see how the hell this comes into play. Is there an actual pig man with a chainsaw? Like what is going on here?
I want to see that movie, Pigman with a Chainsaw.
Pigman with a Chainsaw coming next summer to a theater.
Your friend would love that. I think your friend has a type, the crazy fat Ethel, and there's certainly a type there.
But as I mentioned in the intro, this is coming at a time when we're starting to see slashers. This is a genuinely different flavor of horror in that it is a comedy. It is a horror film. There's definitely enough of both of those things going on. And I'd be curious to hear what other people's thoughts are. I feel like it finds a really interesting balance between those two in that it's not poking fun at itself. We just have some really eccentric characters that have a sense of humor about themselves and about the world around them. How does the humor and the horror balance for you?
Yeah, that's a big part of this movie for me. I'm doing my own podcast right now about how horror comedy has become this big thing now, and that there's this interesting balance where it's not as much parody and it's not as much kind of like doing lip service to the horror. There's actually this thing where the comedy is used in a way to make when it decides to go horrible really gripping. I think the comedy in this and the better horror comedies tend to soften you up a little bit. So when the horror does actually hit, it hits a little bit harder. It's done more satirically in this. And I was thinking about how it changes so much from the beginning of the movie to the end, where, we're seeing a pig-headed chainsaw guy, but he's also laughing this crazy laugh. He's been reserved the whole damn time, right? He's just this polite, nice guy. There's no stains on him ever. And all of a sudden, he's just making this crazy, crazy sound. And you can see that as humorous. I see parts of this movie kind of like Old Dark House, where you're like sitting there. Is it funny? Is it not funny? What the hell did I just see? And very few movies do that. I would put this in the same category as Mother's Day, where you have these two movies that happen kind of early in the cycle. And both of them feel as if they're connected to older films, but they're a reworking of them. So Mother's Day is kind of like Last House on the Left. And then you have something where like this, which is very much like Texas Chainsaw, but it's also very much like Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. Grandmother's quote is pretty much the history of the world, my dear, is who gets to eat and who gets eaten. And I'm like going, wow, this is amazing, that this movie does this. Both of those movies have a level of humor in them that allows it to be kind of grotesque in a way that most movies wouldn't be. Like the comedy in this is nasty. The idea of people sitting in the ground with their vocal cords cut going is humorous and in like an old Vincent Price kind of way, but the way that it's done is not at all. It's very much like what was that movie, Eyes of My Mother? One of the most horrifying moments, a woman with her throat cut. I'm like going, it's horrifying in this. And there were like 24 people groaning in the ground in this movie.
And maybe that's what makes it funny is that there's a lot of them. It's not one person that we're focused on their specific torture. We're like, no, this is a lifestyle. Farmer Vincent and Ida are both kind of like having fun with them, and since they are who we're connected to, we're on their side.
But that's so sadistic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds the laughter and the cuteness of it, I think, is a commentary that's going through the movie. I mean, the idea that they're very religious, they're wanting to preserve the earth, all this stuff, how easily deluded you can be to justify whatever the fuck you want to do. And so there's that idea of the laughter reminds me of like Last House on Dead End Street, which is a little bit different, but has that grotesquerie of where everybody's laughing while terrible things are happening to the people around them.
Beyond just the general gore, which is fairly light for a horror movie, there's some other more disturbing concepts that are just done as dialogue, like the story about the dog. And it was waking up Granny's sleep, and Farmer Vincent took care of it all right and made sure it shut up. And it just kind of goes into detail about what he did to it, and then the family ate it, and they're all, this is matter of fact. We're just using the old family secrets, and meat's meat and man's got to eat. You kind of see the horror through Terry's eyes as she's hearing this story, but that was one of the more unsettling things to me. And I also agree the throat cutting and the gurgling, that kind of got under my skin a little bit.
We have to give props to like the production and the casting for the combination of being able to keep these both the comedy and the horror at the same time, specifically because Rory was such a serious actor before this, and coming in playing somebody like this makes you immediately trust him. And there's like a realism to his character as Vincent, instead of like if you got a goofy comedy guy in, you wouldn't have that levity immediately. And then I also think there's something to be said about the sets and the lighting being a little bit goosebumpsy when it does come to those moments in the garden. So the levity of them being, put into the ground and they're gurgling and stuff. There's a silliness because the actors are having a good time and you can feel that energy. The characters want to be there. They think what they're doing is important. So you're having fun with them. Like you said, they're the antagonists, but we're enjoying them. And they believe that humans, we need less of them and we need more food. They have a reason. There's a connection there. So even if it's psychotic, their logic is sound to them. So they're acting in a realism in their reality.
I think a lot of the characters in themselves are part of the comedy. Ivan, the Terrible or whatever, the band that's there. And I mean, Ida herself, she's making breakfast, singing and jamming out to singing about you're eating my heart out. And I love the balance of the comedy and the horror in it. And like you said about the dog story, like they're all having a good time and picnicking. And as the story keeps going, you're like, wait a minute, red flags. Whoa.
Right. But they all just, it's history. It's just family
Right.
history. It's not, there's no judgment attached to it. And I
Right.
think that's part of what you just said, Jesselyn, about, Rory Calhoun as Vincent and Nancy Parsons as Ida. These are really interesting and engaging and likable characters. And because we are presented to them first, we connect with them. They're not who we're scared of. And so we start going along the ride with them and like, oh, they actually do pretty horrible things, but they seem nice. So let's just go along with it and see how it goes. John, having seen it in the theater with people losing their minds, how is it in terms of like watching the horror and the humor play out in a crowd?
Well, I think one of the charms of this film is how unpredictable it is. And just like it goes in so many different territories and directions that one would not expect. It's almost like every 10 minutes you're like, okay, it's not going to get more ridiculous. And that ridiculousness, of course, is not kind of what we have come to expect with horror comedy, because, like the kinky swingers, like all of a sudden they just pop up, and it's not just like we get introduced to them. There's a whole scene crafted around their lifestyles and their personalities. This time watching it, one of the things that really stood out to me that I thought was really hilarious was how procedural this film is. I don't know that I can think of another horror film where they are truly presenting to the audience, here's how they do everything. Like we have thought through their whole practice. It's how they do the crash. They gas them out. Then they show the huge drill to put the hole into the ground. The syringes, they do step by step. And then even when you get to the hypnotizing light, like you're just like, what the fuck is going on? And I also couldn't help but think, they go through all that trouble to bring out the hypnotizing light. One, they got to have a generator probably for that light in and of itself. They bring it out, they hypnotize them to then just break their necks. That seemed like an excessive amount of trouble to go through to just dispose of these people when they've showed how quickly they were able to cut their vocal cords. So just it's absurdity in so many different ways.
Farmer Vincent, I think, is also, as he says during that car ride, he likes the creativity of it. You get the sense that maybe he hasn't done the mesmerizing machine before and he's trying it out. Like, how will this work? How I think it's going to work. Send them off on their trip and then break their neck in the middle of it so they don't even know. He does say that. He talks about how he treats his stock better than most people treat their farm animals. And I would say that that's true to a certain extent. there's certain things I'm kind of like, well, I think our people who are planted in the secret garden are not having the best time of it. Let's talk a little bit about our performers, Rory Calhoun, and what he brings to Farmer Vincent.
He's kind of schlock cinema royalty, or at least in the latter quarter of his career. I mean, he has a massive acting resume stretching back to the 40s, and it's mostly Westerns and character roles and things like that. And then you get to like Night of the Lepus and Hell Comes to Frogtown and Revenge of Bigfoot and this. He seems to be having fun.
And I think that's the key, right? Is that we're enjoying him having a good time. I don't think he'd done a lead role in quite a while.
No.
And coming into this, when this is the script that comes across your plate and he like goes, yeah, this is the thing I want to do. I think he was 57 when he did this one.
Yeah. This is, it's very interesting that you bring that up because, of course, the fact that he was a Western guy, Westerns have that thing of good and bad, right? And so he brings a level of austerity and dignity from those characters and the way that he holds himself. I mean, how old was he? Like 57 or something like that, I think was said at that time. He looks great, right? He looks like he's taking care of himself. But what's interesting is how good and subtle and not subtle at the same time his acting is in this, because he's in a comedy, right? He's definitely the farmer guy, and he's saying these things. He's a salesman, but every so often you realize, and what I like about this movie, and I mentioned it before, the idea of being delusional about your dignities that you give other people, that you think that you're better though. He's talking about other people as animals. He's not killing his sister and saying, there's too many people, I'll just take you out. No, there's a pecking order that's going on. And so you see that in his performance. So he's all smiles, he's all business. Like we think that family gets away. And then we see the 2 Mylar balloons that the little girls had in the slaughterhouse later. So we realize he's just taking everybody out that he wants to. But there are moments of true ugliness in his eyes. It reminded me at one point in there of John Lithgow when he was on Dexter. There's this character that he plays, it's a serial killer, and he's John Lithgow, kind of goofy and daddy and stuff like that. And then he gets crossed, and there's a moment when this blank slate goes over his eyes. And Rory does that in this film. He goes from being pleasant to being very calculating. And I think, the idea of all that procedural is part of what makes this so unsettling, because it's really commenting on what we do with food, comments on how we treat animals, and how there's this whole thing of, look at how kind I am. And yet these are people sticking out of the ground, and we're spared nothing. When they're putting a syringe in people, they're crying, right? So it's not a comedy in that sense. There's the comedy, and then there's that thing where it goes a little bit further.
Yeah, there's genuine horror when we think about the concept of what's happening. And as you said, like we get to see the victims suffering. They're not happy with their lot here. And some of them are pretty upset about it. Like the one guy who's got his throat, he's like snapping at Ida. What you said, John, like the idea of the procedural, I hadn't actually thought about like what the early days at Farmer Vincent's farm were like while they were figuring this stuff out. It might not have gone as smoothly as it does now.
That's an instance where I'd almost like to see a prequel to like see the trial and error. But in terms of in Rory, I got to back what Jesselyn said in the beginning about how that casting of him is so incredible, because you don't expect him to play a role like this based on his previous filmography. And I'm trying to think of someone comparable at that time. I'm drawing a blank, but like there's plenty of people that you would not be surprised to see in this role,
right?
And to have someone like that, because like with Ida, is she terribly surprising as where her character goes? No, because she's kind of like right there in the beginning. They're displaying it, they're kind of telegraphing it. But with him, there is certainly some nuance to the role, and I think the casting was incredible with him.
Yeah, there's a kindliness to him, there's a decency to him, and yet he does these horrible. I had this instance of like, what would Jimmy Stewart be like as Farmer
Right.
Vincent. I'm like, that would have just caught people off guard. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're playing with the expectations of casting Rory Calhoun and this role, and then turning it around on people and be like, and he's, a cannibal and a murderer and a sadist and.
But he knows how to scare children into not crying. Like what a very interesting moment to have with him in the first 10 minutes.
Yeah. I love that the parents are like, oh, that's good.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks.
They're like, we will proudly display your bumper sticker on our car now. Thank you.
Yep. We talked a little bit about Nancy Parsons, but this is kind of like pre-Porky's, which was where I saw her for the first time. And she's so great in that. And I can't help but think that this got her that job. I don't know that for a fact, but it was just watching. She's just such a solid actor. And she does have a lot of nuance. Yeah. And she plays these characters that feel kind of iconic, yes, but also kind of brute force elements in terms of like, you just think that it's this one thing, but it's not. Like her Miss Ballbricker in Porky's has all sorts of notes that she's playing. I'd say the same thing is true here. And I think the two of them play so well together. And I think about how Rory Calhoun's this massive veteran Hollywood actor, and then Nancy Parsons is coming in pretty fresh. And to have the calm and the demeanor to just pair off with this Hollywood veteran and give as good as she gets, I think it's just great.
Yeah, she's so very real. The character that she's playing, even though you've not seen anything quite like that, in real life, you've seen something like that. You have relatives, someone in your family tree that is like that, where they're just a little bit off. And she plays that with such ease. It's very easy to make, she's a heavy woman. It could be very easy to have her play, somebody who's giggly all the time or something like that. Instead, that it's always just this little foreboding of like, she's a little dangerous.
Yeah. She's got a real gravity to her.
Yeah. And the way that she kind of dotes over her older brother feels very realistic.
I just liked how childish she was in some of the scenes. It was like almost like a girly innocence, but then you see the darkness behind her eyes. You kind of peek out, like the swimming scene, where it's like, let's go tubing. You've never been tubing, and then she pulls out the little box cutter. And things get real. But yeah, I mean, I loved her performance in that scene, especially just the way that she pretended like she was freaking out, but yet she was pushing the girl's head under the water the whole time.
I just think there's something about her as a person. Like, I feel like I don't know her. I've never even seen an interview with her, but I feel like I know her and like I want her to be my friend. There's like this energy, this charisma about her as a person. Like you want her in your court. Maybe because you're scared of her and you know that if she's not your friend, you're like in a problematic situation. And that might even be the familiar thing that you were saying earlier, Scott, where like you feel like you know her, like you've met her before, so like you have a connection, you want her safe because that's a real person. And that's so fascinating that she was able to do that in one of her first big performances like that, like really hold her own that way. And then I think it's very interesting to see her femininity next to Terry. I almost feel like where you would think it would make her more of the masculine character, it almost makes her even more feminine. Like they're more like girly pops together, hanging out, chit-chatting. And then even more so the dynamic between her and her two brothers, right? For some reason, Bruce is like kind of the effeminate one in the dynamic, and how he's kind of pushed out because their friendship, Vincent and Ida, are so close. I think that's a very interesting dynamic as well.
I enjoyed her quite a bit. It took me a little while to parse the relationships because they didn't bring up that they were siblings right away. And then when Bruce shows up as the cop, you're like, what is going on here? That she's just attacking a cop and now they're having a tickle fight. And it took me a little while to figure out, and he's a sibling too. Oh, okay.
Well, and I don't think they really clarify it.
No, they don't.
Purposely. And I think it's such a strong decision because it just adds to kind of like the uneasiness because I think just growing up in our society, we see Vincent and Ida together. They run this motel. You're just going to assume they're married. Mm-hmm. And then you do get these little moments where you're like, I don't know. That feels like kind of weird for a marriage relationship. And then to have the reveal that they're siblings. And then when Bruce gets revealed, I really think that is such a bold but very successful decision on this film's part. And it would be very different if it was known from the get-go that they were all siblings.
Yeah.
It also felt weird to me that Bruce didn't seem to be in on the family recipe secret. And he has one line where I think he's telling Terry that he ran away at age 11 and was glad that he left the area, but clearly he's come back and now has just not been let in on exactly what goes on behind the scenes.
When I was doing my little bit of research prior to this, rumor has it the original script, there was an incestuous situation going on. I don't know. So you know as well. So potentially we're still feeling the vibrations of that.
I think that makes sense too, because there's a lot of queasy stuff in this. I mean, the way that Bruce is a twisted fuck too. Just in a whole completely different way. There's something wrong with all these people. And a part of Ida's thing seems to be a real is it protective jealousy or is it sexual jealousy as things start to proceed on? I mean, the whole box cutter thing and everything. I mean, there's a whole, I got to get rid of this problem. And that they have a certain way, this family, of ridding the problem. And I kind of like how it's displayed in here, where you see all this other twisted stuff, like somebody mentioned the sex club kind of thing that was going on. They're passing judgment on these people while they're killing them off, but they have that hometown, homespun corn pone kind of perversity to them. And the reason that those two are, so connected might be that, they've been twisted forever and they know how to keep each other's secrets. And that keeping each other's secrets is an intimacy that those two have that the other one doesn't.
It just hit me now that, yes, we have our three siblings, which is also mirroring our three siblings in Texas Chainsaw. And I think that there is definitely some calling back to Texas Chainsaw. I read that, Tobe Hooper was actually approached to direct this one, but instead we ended up with Kevin Connor. And Kevin Connor is somebody who I was familiar with his name as a director because he directed all of those Doug McClure movies like Land That Time Forgot and Warlords of Atlantis and At the Earth's Core. And those are movies that I absolutely grew up with and loved. And so the idea that he was also the mind behind, not really the mind behind, because it's definitely the Jaffee brothers script that gives this one its special flavor. But I think Kevin Connor is able to give us the fun and the genre stuff and knows how to balance those two. Like The Land That Time Forgot is so much about, it's a dinosaur story, it's Edgar Rice Burroughs, but it's also very melodramatic in the best possible way. We have our square-jawed hero. We have the beautiful heroine. We have the mustache twirling villains, and it all plays together really, really well. And so this feels like it's that same kind of twisted story, just kind of brought up to another level. But he also directed the anthology From Beyond the Grave for Amicus. Mm-hmm. That was one of his beginning films. So those are hallmarked by a combination of fear and fun. And so it feels like he was just absolutely the right guy for the job. And he's a British director, but this was his first American film. And I think he does a really fine job here.
Well, since you mentioned Tobe Hooper and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I knew, it's impossible to not talk about both of those when looking at Motel Hell. I never had this thought until this watch. Is Motel Hell the prototype for Texas 2? It really, and it makes me wonder if seeing Motel Hell and Tobe Hooper realizing that he passed up this opportunity and saw what could be done, if it led to it. And this is a controversial take, but I'm not a Texas 2 fan. That mixture of the horror and humor does not work for me at all, but it does in Motel Hell. And just, there were so many times I was watching this, especially once you get to the chainsaw fight. It's just, again, it's so hard not to think of Texas 2. So that's my thought, is that Hooper might owe some due to Kevin for bringing this film into existence, and then thus, we get Texas 2.
real quickly on the Kevin Costner thing, he was a hired gun on this. And he essentially was looking for a property. They brought it to him. And he said, I'm not really that big on wanting to just do a straight horror film. The original script had bestiality and stuff in it. And he was like, if we can make this fun. And so he didn't want to be pigeonholed into horror, which, damn it. But at the same point, I get it. And he decided that he needed to do this. Now, he spends a lot of time saying, you never see anything. And I'm like, there are torsos. They're peeling the skin off of a torso and eating it and pushing it into smoke. Give me a break.
Yeah. You don't see a lot of cutting and arterial spray. But yeah, there's so much that's implied. Like the horror is steeped in this. It's almost smoked into it.
Interesting enough talking about the food. I think it's good that he doesn't show that much because he's able to create something that's also like a popcorn movie. Like Jen, you watched it and ate pizza. Like that's bizarre. Like, but the fact that you can do that about a movie where it's cannibalism, like that's a talent. And you're still saying something and it's still gross. I don't know. I think that's really impressive. And I think it's also cool to know that he's not an American and it's like a farmer movie about like the American farmer. And he was able to do that and also shot it in California when I think I read. And it's giving like middle America. Like he was able to really hone in on that when he wasn't even from here. So heck yeah, snaps.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jesselyn, because I was going to come back around to it. You watching this as a kid. And it's your first kind of gory horror film. There must have been something about the fact that it is the comedy that allows it to go down easier. Like for me, like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is like my keystone because it's like, okay, I'm scared, but Lou is more scared than I am. And so I'm okay with this. If you can harken back to 6 and 7 year old version of you and like, what were you thinking at the time?
Well, I remember thinking at some points, like with the swinger scene. I thought I didn't know what was going on. I'm like, why are they surprised? I was thinking it was like a Halloween party. And you're bringing your sister along, and I'm just like, I'm like, the woman thinks she's Catwoman because she's got the whip and she's in the black leotard. And then the guy in the tutu, I'm like, oh, okay, well, whatever. He didn't have a costume, put it together. Right. But that's what I was thinking the whole time. I'm like, oh, it's a Halloween party. Yeah, I was too young for that. I didn't know. And my parents, of course, were probably snickering at each other back and forth about the whole thing. But with the horror and the comedy, like it definitely helped. Like I was finding humor in it, but yet, it was kind of gory at the same time, but it didn't really bother me. I don't know. I've always had a strong stomach. So maybe that's why. I was raised on barbarian, sword-swinging, head-lopping movies, as my dad would call them. So they never really bothered me.
How did the cannibalism concept go over for you?
I thought it was gross. Yeah,
like people are eating people.
Like, ew. Yeah. Eating people, ew. Meat's meat, I guess, right? But
well, if you smoke it right, it's okay. Yeah.
It's all about the secret seasoning.
The most unbelievable thing to me in this movie was the price tag on that big ass box of meat. That $2.95, and I was thinking, I just paid $12 for a bag of Old Trapper beef jerky links, like an eighth the size of that thing. The horror stuff didn't really, at my age, didn't really bother me. I was more curious about some of the relationships, like Bob, the health inspector, who comes by, and clearly there is a long-standing relationship bordering on animosity between him and Farmer Vincent. And Vincent's just all affability and smiles. I got the sense as the dread built, as you see Bob getting closer and closer to discovering something he shouldn't see, that Vincent was probably happy about that. This has been a long time coming. He knew what the end game was going to be. And okay, Bob's finally pulled the trigger on this. We're gonna go ahead and get rid of Bob, put him in the ground. Our end to the beginnings of Vincent's process is through Bob. I kind of wanted to see Bob have more of a role in the end game of Vincent than he did. I was expecting among the various people, including John Ratzenberger, that they pull out of the ground, that Bob would be the one to finally kill off Vincent.
Help lead the charge. Yeah. we talk about, our various victims. We get introduced to them very quickly, but they're not just cannon fodder in the way that like some of the later slasher films would be. When we meet our swingers, we're like, okay, they're wild and they make a big impression, and then we're done. And we meet our two, Vegas girls, and they make an impression, and then they're in the ground. Ivan and the Terribles. We don't need to spend a lot of time with these folks to recognize they're going to fall prey to the superior planning and intellect. I like all of the variety of victims that we get. It's not just the same old camp counselor type of thing.
Bob is easily, for me at least, the most impactful of them, because here's someone who not only is an authority figure, he actually sees what his demise is going to be before it happens. So this whole idea of waking up in the nightmare. He's the character that we see in movies like this every so often, where curiosity is going to get you. He's the knowledge. He's our eyes. He sacrifices himself so we get the truth. And he gets taken down. But there's that whole thing of them like, hey, Bob. And that's the sadism that seems like comedy. And you can read it in two different ways. And for me, when I was reading it this time around, I'm like going, there's such a level of sadistic cruelty to that. Can't just kill him. Here's your enemy. He's now going to be planted in your backyard for you to fuck with.
With our survivors, spoiler again, when they get out at the end, you were talking, Eric, about Bob having more of a role. They're all kind of walking zombie-like, and as a cluster. Any thoughts on that? Do we think that is a deliberate callback to Romero?
I always took it as, who knows how long some of them were in the ground. I mean, you had to have some kind of muscle
atrophying.
They're probably stumbling around. They've just been kind of planted there and immobile for, who knows how long.
To choose to stylistically display that, I don't know how much of this was in the script or not, but there's a clear affection for the history of horror movies. He takes her up to look at the drive-in, and it's not a 1980 movie. It's the monster that challenged the world. Here with the Romeros, calling back to Texas Chainsaw, this is clearly a love letter to the genre itself. I don't know if that's Connor. I don't know if that's Jaffee, but I'm glad that it's there, because as a horror fan, we feel included. We feel like, oh yeah, I know that movie.
I think it's hard to ignore the potential callback to Dawn of the Dead, especially because they would have shot this in 79 had it come out in 80. And Dawn of the Dead obviously would have been out for a year at that time. So Dawn of the Dead would have been pretty topical and probably on the forefront of everyone's mind. So I definitely do think that there is a nod to Romero and Dawn of the Dead, if not Night of the Living Dead as well.
Several Hitchcock nods. Psycho is the most obvious one.
I also think we're a moment like that where it's the cluster of victims. It's such a short moment of panic where we don't know if they're going to attack or not, giving us rules that we understand immediately as a viewer going, these look like the zombies from the movie I saw last year. They probably can't run fast. They probably can't, whatever. It gives us the information quickly. So I do think that probably was a smart decision. And I also think there's something to be said about a lot of the victims being like horn dogs or hippies and some sort of like, I'm going to clean the earth and feed the earth with the people. I'm going to clean and feed the people who deserve to live, which is like a really interesting thing. I don't think that falls on all of their victims. Sometimes they're just in the way, but that also is a big slasher thing in the 70s to try to say something with your kills. So I do think that's the callback as well.
Well, and Scott said, there's that kind of hierarchy as to who gets killed and who doesn't, who gets to eat and who gets to be eaten. They definitely are seeing the world through a certain moral lens. And I love the fact that we have Wolfman Jack showing up as, an evangelist who clearly is not of the purest of heart. Religion serves him rather than him serving religion. They certainly are picking and choosing which bits of scripture to follow and which ones serve them, which ones don't. This allows them to have commerce. It allows them to, continue to have a lifestyle, and they can also fulfill the idea of, taking out the undesirables and putting them on the plate. we haven't yet talked about Terry, played by Nina Axelrod, and that whole relationship, which everybody's just shaking their heads right now. I wonder what is going on there. Like, what story are we trying to tell? What do you think the Jaffees are going for here? Because it's one more surprise. You know, we talked about how the script is full of surprises. It's one more surprise. And I wonder if maybe that's really what it's about, is finding an unexpected element and then exploring that and seeing where it takes us.
I think she might have some daddy issues or something, maybe.
Perhaps.
I don't know. She obviously has had issues in her life in order to be like seeing all these red flags, but she's like, you know what? Like, maybe she was a gold digger. I don't know. Because she knows that he was famous. He's a famous farmer with his famous meats, you know. She thought the opportunity was there, and hey, why not? I'll just carry on the business. He's old. I don't know.
Well, she does say, she says, no wonder you're famous. How come I never heard of you before? so does she know that he's famous?
A controversial take. I think they are like one sentence away from it being super believable. If you had just like told me something about Bo,
right,
that related me back to Vincent, that they have something in common that is connecting to her and she feels safe to him, and there's some sort of Beauty and the Beast situation happening to her. Right. I think he's a handsome man who's taking care of himself. His sister loves him and is making her feel safe. She's been taking care of him. He took care of this man who was just passed away and like didn't have to make her have to deal with anything, and is keeping her safe and owns a business. Okay, girl. I mean, it's not for me, but I pick up what you're putting down, I guess.
This character is where I go, yep, this was written by two guys in their late 20s, early 30s. Because from the very beginning, I can't believe her. Right? There's a motorcycle accident. The whole thing is like, how did they make these choices? Like, oh, and I buried him. It's like, oh yeah, he died and I buried him, and you can just stay. I'm like, what movie is that? That's another movie right there.
But he was okay in that county.
Yeah. In that county, extenuating circumstances. What?
Buried under extenuating circumstances.
Yeah. What was the extenuating circumstance? And she just is okay with that in such a way. They didn't even give her like, oh, well, she has a major head injury and she has amnesia or something, which would work. Instead, It's just like, okay. And as the movie goes on, she has progressively more nude scenes. And I'm like going, this character was completely confusing to me. I was watching, I'm like going, oh man, like the whole weird date rapey thing of the drive-in and stuff. I mean, there's just some really weird stuff that she endures in this and barely reacts.
That's why I think she has some kind of trauma in her earlier when she was younger. That's the only thing I can think of.
I don't think we're at that stage in the 1980 to inform that choice. I agree with it. I think it's kind of like, as we look at it through 2025 eyes, that we can say, oh, that must be what's going on. But I'm just looking at it going, in the past and in past reviews, I've kind of laid the blame at Nina Axelrod's feet as just not being a very good performance. But I also feel like this is an unplayable character. Like, this character is like, how do you possibly ground this character in reality whilst all of this weirdness is happening around her?
The head injury would have done it for me if she had had a more obvious injury in the motorcycle crash and, played it as dazed for most of the film. I also come back to Bo wasn't that great a guy either from all observations. So Jen's point of her trauma in the past, maybe this is the latest in a series of bad choices.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and you do get the sense that she is kind of like a hippie chick, and maybe that is why she sees Vincent not for his age, but simply as another human being. As you said, Jessalyn, he has a lot of really good qualities that would be attractive. And so maybe she's just looking at the world through a lens of purity that most of us are not used to. We just see her going, yeah, he's another human being. And I like him. He likes me. And he treats me well, which you get the sense that maybe she hasn't been treated well by most of the men in her life. And here's somebody who's just being very kind and is not trying to assault her like the local badge is. Why not be attracted to Farmer Vincent?
I really think the sister being a person who shows her this is a good man is also like a problem. I think that would beige a red flag for some women.
That she does or does not?
That like Ida and him are close. I think a woman would go, "Oh, he must be safe, sweet man.
Right.
I like him." Yeah.
Right.
But he punches her in the stomach.
But he punches her in the stomach.
Right.
Well, they're
Well, she was
sister
about
and
to
brother.
give the
Come on.
secret out.
Yeah, but that whole picnic scene right there would be like the dog story and that. I'd be like, okay, what? You killed a dog for being too loud and fed it to your mom, and you're okay with that?
Yep.
Be like, nope. And then he punches his sister. Like, that's even a double flag. I'm like, no.
Anyway, this meat's really yummy.
Yeah.
What Jesselyn said about it being one sentence away from working really well about Bo being older, because I was looking at the cast and I just can double checked. The actor that played Bo is 22 years older. You could be establishing that she is drawn to older men. That's who is in her relationships, and that kind of lends to her finding Vincent so charming and enduring. So yeah, I think maybe if we would even just gotten like one more scene with Bo, that we could have kind of gained more from that character.
Again, I think we're all doing a really good job of justifying this. So good on us. In the past, I've not been very kind to her performance. As I'm thinking about it now, I'm like, I don't know how you could possibly play this character, not without more help from the script. You know, with what she's got to play with, I think she's doing the best she can. Going back to Kevin Connor and our look of the film, we have cinematographer Thomas Del Ruth. As the Blu-ray started up, and I'm watching the whole scene kind of bathed in that neon red, I'm like, who the hell shot this? And it's Thomas Del Ruth, whose later credits would be The Breakfast Club and Stand By Me. This guy went on to have like a major Hollywood career. And this movie looks great. You have the interiors, you have the exteriors out in the garden. You have daylight, you have nighttime scenes. Like, I think it looks fantastic. And a lot of that credit I give to Thomas Del Ruth and Kevin Connor, because boy, Jesselyn, you mentioned the production design. I just think like this is a really great looking movie. You really feel kind of immersed in it. You can smell the smoke in the smokehouse.
Lighting's so important. I just think, especially like, there's no darkness. It's night, but we're never in complete darkness. And I think that's so smart. It keeps us not like, oh, who's going to pop out? Is the car's going to run into the tree or whatever. We're with them consistently. We know what's happening. We can see everything. And the neons on top of that are making it more whimsical. So now we're in like a horror, whimsy, sort of like unrealism space at night. But during the daytime, it's lit super normal. We're just there. It looks good. It doesn't look high contrast. It doesn't look like an HBO show. It just looks like life. So when things happen, it's scarier, but it's also, like I said earlier, there's a big goosebumps energy happening here. And the Stand By Me now makes a lot of sense to me because he has this like earthy sunlight situation that I see later on in his work now that you've mentioned that. So I just think the lighting specifically in this is so important to the humor and the darkness at the same time.
I want to jump on that because one of the things that I remember is the night scenes, that there's like a blue light down the hall, down the road on several different shots, and that works so well in giving some depth. But really, the very beginning of the movie, I think there's up to 5 minutes maybe before we're hearing any dialogue whatsoever outside of what's on the radio or the TV. And so there's a lot of screen direction stuff that's going on. We have a lot of action that's happening through this movie. Bob going in to discover the heads. There's no dialogue whatsoever once his car pulls up at night. And so we're constantly getting a geography of the farm. It's never really completely confusing because we get in the background a lot of shots when you're seeing Bob originally, that fake thing of lawn or bushes and stuff that's hiding the secret garden is in the background. So the direction is really very smart in that way. And the one that really hit me where I went, oh my God, this movie's really hitting on certain cylinders was when the shambling zombie-esque people are going down the road. I went, that's Near Dark. That's the scene in Near Dark where they're coming up over the hill, all the vampires standing there, and there's like this weird beam of light going on. And so I really think that the style of lighting and the screen direction is really important in how this movie works.
I actually made a note, Scott, that it was over 6 minutes. I think we hit 6 minutes and 5 seconds until we heard our first bit of dialogue. And I made note of that because I loved that opening and just taking that time. And I hate to be that person that had the thought, like, they just don't make movies like this anymore. And but then on the flip side, like as a filmmaker myself, I have had those arguments with producers that have said, this is too boring, this is too slow. And just to be able to just be in that scenery and just kind of like get a lay of the land and the way that the screen direction is helping, I absolutely loved it. And I think it was such a bold move to go 6 minutes. And again, like this is before the slasher craze really hit, but 6 minutes of a film, no dialogue, we're just kind of existing. So incredible.
I thought sound design wise, it was a cool movie in that before we ever hear the gurgling of the heads in the garden, we're hearing the kind of white noise of that 8-track tape that he sticks in. You don't know what is up with that. You don't even really know there is a garden at that point. You just see him stick the 8-track tape in, and I made a note like, okay, what's up with this? What purpose does that serve? And I mean, I assumed there were victims or meats or something that were being hidden from us at that point, but I liked the element that you're given this, it's not obvious what it means. Later you find out what it means and you're like, oh. But the gurgling, even though it did sound like one person doing all of the gurgling, rather than the individual actors getting to gurgle their own gurgled dialogue, it was very effective.
One of my favorite, probably lighting, is in the actual butcher shop. It just looks so grotesque, and I mean, it's dark, but yet you can see everything. You can see the things hanging there, and the meat that was smoked, and the barrels full of like all of the giblets or whatever, the eyes and hands and whatever is in there. Like you said, you can almost smell the smokiness. Like you could smell like the grossness in there.
All right, here comes my biggest question. Why does he put the pig head on? That has baffled me for the entire. I'm like, why is he putting the pig head on to fight with the chainsaw?
How would he not?
How is he doing it? Yeah, let alone why.
He's skulled.
We all go along with it, but it's like, what is happening here? No, I want an answer. We're not ending this panel.
Yeah, that's him. It's almost like, you know, you have your face that you put on for the rest of the world, the persona, and then there's this part right here. And it's almost like he's like letting his hair down. This is the real me. There's the guy who dresses in a tutu and stuff. This is him. He's not in drag anymore. This is him straight. And yeah, it's just like his little thing. I mean, I don't know what his thoughts are on it, but when he's laughing like that, that's what creeps me out. It's not just that he's wearing this thing, but he's like, I don't know, it reminiscent, again, I hate to bring it up, Texas Chainsaw one more time, but it's like Leatherface spinning at the end. There's like this giddiness, this weirdness. It's not what you expect. And it's so off-putting. And I can just see it. The writers sat there and said, what could we do? There's these guys wearing masks now. I don't know. How about a pig head? Oh, that's fucking ridiculous. Yes, let's put that in.
I think it's as simple as some butchers put on an apron when they work and he puts on a pig head. I mean...
Yeah, the apron usually serves a purpose.
Did you see how it looks? There's a purpose there.
I took the purpose to be a psychological attack because we see he's good at scaring people with the little girls at the beginning. If we had one more scene of him scaring somebody, that would help set up my theory a little better. But I think that the pig head is just freaking unsettling. And regardless of me making a note, how does he see out of that thing? But a dude with a chainsaw and a pig head is, you don't want to be in that room. Yeah, I think he's just trying to freak people out.
It seems like such an iconic image that it was like something that I would assume that they had before the script was even written.
Yep.
And something they were leading to get to.
Yep.
And if you were to ask me as the writer, why is that happening? If I wrote it, I would just be like, oh, you know, it's this poetic moment. He knows it's the end of a line. Da, da, da. Like I would just bullshit it because this needs to be seen.
Right.
Regardless if it makes sense. Because like you said, he's scared one person before, but he seems pretty level-headed and like pretty like aware of his decision making, unless he like knew he was gonna die and wanted to like make some sort of last performance art because he likes making art.
Yes.
An artist.
Yep.
Maybe we can go with that.
No, I like that.
Loves
That's
the
good.
creativity.
Could there also be something about the fact that he's going against his brother? And like there's something that he doesn't want to face off.
Two pigs.
Against family. Two pigs. There we
pigs!
go.
We did it. We did it.
Sold.
As I was watching it, because I think you're right, Jocelyn. I think it was this idea of a guy with a chainsaw and a pig head. I mean, again, that's what sells that Fango issue. It's what sells that scene. Because I was imagining, you know what? This could really friggin' work with Rory Calhoun laughing and waving a chainsaw around against his brother. Like, that would be an amazing scene unto itself. There's something about the pig head that elevates it into a more comedic vein, as opposed to it being a dead ahead, serious struggle between two human beings with chainsaws. And again, I think it would have worked. And I mean, clearly Rory Calhoun seems like somebody who's capable. He's up to the job. It's not like you're sticking this pig head on a stunt man because we want to disguise the fact that this old guy can't do it. Like, no, Rory Calhoun could totally sling a chainsaw around and be fine. I think it's trying to kick it up a notch to be something that's heightened, be something that is more than just two guys fighting with chainsaws.
Yeah, he's 100% believable as a farmer. He's moving all the equipment. He's doing all the stuff. He gets that chainsaw going like one or two hits. Not once do you think he's an actor in those moments, except for moments when I went, man, he's just flying around on that thing. You know, he's doing well.
We've mentioned a few already, but favorite moments. Yes, Eric, please dive in.
Edie, where's my jelly?
I actually really love the incorporation of the Wolfman Jack televangelist moments during the swinger scene, where we're just cutting back and forth to the TV. Just, it's not overdone. It's subtle enough. I'm not sure I really necessarily understand the intent, and I'm completely fine with that because it just made it a little uncomfortable. And growing up loving American Graffiti, I've always just like been drawn to Wolfman Jack. So to have him in this role and in this movie, I wanted more. I really wanted more Wolfman Jack. But I think if you take those television shots and even just the dialogue being in the background out of that scene, it doesn't work the way that it does.
One of my favorite scenes is the reveal of the garden, of the secret garden, and what's underneath those sacks. That was always my favorite. And then they're all at them. It always cracked me up that they never try to actually like form words. They just
That's right. You could do better.
still have tongues and lips and stuff, but they still just go.
I think for me, when I watch a movie, I wait for the entire thing so I can like see the themes and like what the person's trying to say, and then it'll like roll and form things for me. And I think for this, like the ending, him being like the preservatives, like that's like this whole thing has been about that.
Yeah.
Like hit like, and that is like obviously that's a joke. That's the whole point. Is you're supposed to end with a joke, but like what? That's so perfect. That's 100 out of 100. You cannot top that. That's so fucking good. That's all I have to say.
His one regret using preservatives.
Yep.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I love that because it shows that everything's been a delusion, right? Everything about this wholesome American kind of thing that he's trying to do, this country living thing, is a lie. And I thought that was great. I also try to see when I'm watching a movie like this, what is the original idea that they said, we got to build a script around this. And that's usually my favorite scene. That is when the reveal comes with that pig head on. I'm like going, this just went into, what is this movie? I knew what it was. It was staying pretty much like it could have been an Alfred Hitchcock thriller or something like that. And then it goes completely unhinged. It's in Tobe Hooper land at that point. And so I really, really like that because it hits me as that was the thing that they decided to go with. And honorable mention is just the reveal with Bob, because that reminds me of Arbogast going up the stairs in Psycho.
When you were talking about the televangelist on the TV, I think there is a And this, again, maybe our young screenwriters, kind of saying that all this Christianity is horseshit. You're going to have the televangelist who's just sitting there going, we need your money. We just really need your money. Like, he can't even be bothered to whip up something around it. And that we have these, quote, Christian characters who are antagonists, who are murdering people. I think there might be some social commentary going on there. These folks who present as kindly and thoughtful are really, like you said, Scott, they're just kind of liars at the end. Like, they're just out to serve themselves. One of my favorite ones that just jumped out at me this viewing was that drive with Vincent and Ida, where he kind of realizes how much he enjoys the traps, and he enjoys coming up with different ways of luring these people in. They've refined the process of curing the meats, having them season in the ground for however long, but he still likes coming up with different ways of getting them, like, putting up fake cows in the middle of the road. He's still out there and exploring and creating, and thinks of himself as an artist, which is fun.
He took his time to paint those and to cut them out and make them. Like,
Yep.
that was pure artistry right there.
And, will he ever do it again? Who knows? Let's go ahead and circle back around, and final thoughts on Motel Hell. Eric, let's start things off with you.
I had talked about how I wasn't as impressed with this movie as I had thought I would be, based on its reputation among me and my friends. And then that final, Rory Calhoun's final line of dialogue was the taxi driver moment for me, where we've been watching Travis Bickle become this monstrous human being, and suddenly he's the hero of the story because he killed someone who was arguably worse than him. It was one of those things where just the irony of it, and I was like, oh, that's the perfect punchline to this movie. It makes everything worth it.
I've always loved this movie. Of course, it has more sentimental value to me than anything, just because it was my first. It's just such a fun movie. It's one of those movies when you have people over having a couple drinks or something, you just put it on and you guys can all have fun watching it.
Yeah.
It's a wild ride.
I mean, it's the ultimate farm to table movie, guys. I don't know what else to say. No, I'm just kidding. I agree. I was about to say the same thing to you. I think you have to watch it in a group. Because I watched it again this morning by myself, and it became like, okay, I remember this happens next, and then this happens next, and then I end up just like kind of seeing the movie in my own brain before the end. You kind of want to watch it with people who what's going to happen and they don't.
Yeah.
That's really the best part of this is being the bearer of Motel Hell.
I really like the movie because of its humor, that it's one of those movies that I can point to and say, you can do humor and horror together. And I think that's becoming a very big thing at this point. A lot of the movies that have been hits of recent are a comedy horror. And I think that's saying something about where we're going. But really, what I think with this movie and several others, I can't help but say that maybe the most impactful movie that's ever been made in horror is Texas Chainsaw. So many different ideas come from that movie. Just the type of characters that there can be. The idea, not just of the chainsaw, but the idea of country mouse, city mouse, all of that stuff that's in Texas Chainsaw has been used. Even the visual aspect of what farms look like and stuff like that comes from that movie. And yet this one still is able to find its own visual style without being so derivative.
I just can't think of a better family drama with a love triangle that ends in a dual chainsaw fight with one person wearing a pig head.
Nor can I. What you said just a second ago, Scott, with the humor and the horror. The title alone, Motel Hell, has a poetic ring to it. And the idea that it is derived from a sign that is Motel Hello, where they just can't be bothered to fix the O. They would rather it just say Motel Hell half of the time than actually go about covering it up. There's something I really enjoyed about that. And I think it tells you with its title that you're in for a good time, and then you become aware of what kind of good time as it goes on. But I don't think it lets you down in terms of delivering entertainment.
Especially in the 80s, there's so many films that just have ridiculous titles that kind of encapsulate what the film is trying to do or wants to be or is. And then the fact that this title is a direct reference to the location of the film, I think it's such an incredible attribute to this film.
Yeah, and I don't know if it came up the title first or not. It is one of those titles that you're like, we got to make that movie. We got to make Motel Hell. It's been a delight talking about Motel Hell with all of you, and looking forward to having you all on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.